Throughout history, there have been people who have committed some of the most heinous crimes fathomable. For those crimes, they have been convicted and sentenced to death. Welcome to Death Row Executions, where we take a look into the lives of society's worst offenders. And now, your host, Air.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the 66th episode of Death Row Executions. Today's story is on Travis Runnels, who was executed in 2019 for the murder of a prison staff member. Travis Trevino Runnels was born on December 17, 1982 to a high school teen dropout. His mother Nancy dropped out when she was pregnant with Travis's older brother Darmonica. She did end up marrying, but got a divorce by the time Travis was born, and her ex stayed living in their household up until Travis was 10 years old. Reports say that as a child, he was diagnosed with being dyslexic and did not do too well in school because of this. Despite his academic struggles, he was a happy kid who always made people around him laugh. He had a speech impediment growing up, and instead of talking a lot, he dove more into sports and collecting comics. Happy times grew dim as he continued to struggle in school and not get any support, acknowledgement, or help from his mother. Things started to spiral out of control for Travis, and he lost respect for his mother, started stealing from her to buy crack cocaine, and was addicted at a very young age. After moving in with his grandmother and maternal uncle, his Uncle James would take him to dope houses, so he was very familiar with watching people shoot up. No one was interested or involved in his schooling, and he was able to get away with never doing any homework. His behavior was off, and there were clear signs he was different, but there was never any follow-up. Court documents mention that while in school, he ran into a flagpole, knocking himself unconscious. He had burned down his mother's apartment, and after doing chores, he would purposely mess up all of the work he had done and laugh about it. In 1993, when Travis was just 11 years old, he was caught for the first time in an armed robbery, and his official charge was second-degree felony of burglary of a building. He did not go to a juvenile detention center as he was sentenced to probation only. That same year, while on probation, he committed a similar crime, but since it happened while on probation, he was sentenced to juvie. Juvie taught him nothing, and at the age of 13, still a juvenile, he was charged with another felony, and again at the age of 15 for aggravated robbery, and his sentence extended to another 70 years. Dallas County Juvenile Probation ended up giving Travis a psychological evaluation. He was diagnosed with conduct disorder, and many things he did growing up fit perfectly with the symptoms of conduct disorder. He was held at Clements Unit in Potter County, and while in prison, he continued to have issues with guards and fellow inmates. Now, 26 years old, he was miserable with his janitor duty assignment in the boot factory of the prison and took his anger out on others. He got write-ups for hitting a guard in the jaw, throwing his pee on a guard, throwing a light bulb at a guard, and for throwing his feces at a guard. These were all separate incidents, but surprisingly, he still had loyal friends in prison because some inmates gave statements for him on appeals saying he wasn't known to get into any trouble or lash out violently. He requested a transfer to be a barber in the prison instead, but his request was denied. After getting the bad news, he confided in an inmate by the name of Bud Williams and told him that he would kill someone. According to his appeal documents, he went even further and told Bud that he would kill his supervisor, 38-year-old Stanley Wiley, if he even spoke a word to him the next day. He then spoke with another inmate by the name of William Gilchrist, and he said that Travis told him he would hold the boot factory hostage if the inmates were left alone. The next day at around 7 o'clock in the morning, he was on time for work at the boot factory, and he told fellow inmate Philip Yao that he was about to do something. No one had done anything to him, and Supervisor Stanley Wiley had not even said anything to Travis, but equipped with a knife, he walked up to Stanley, forced his head back, and slit his throat. The cut was 23 centimeters long and hit an artery as well as a jugular vein. He cleaned the knife with a rag and Philip calmly asked him why he killed Stanley. According to a statement from Philip, Travis said, "It could have been any offender or inmate, as long as they were white." Philip told him that he could get the death penalty, but Travis felt that a dead man couldn't talk and he would not be sentenced to death. Stanley was taken to a local hospital in Amarillo, Texas, but was pronounced dead at 11 o'clock in the morning. The prison was put on lockdown, and prison officials were able to speak with some inmates who were witnesses to the attack. Media got wind of the attack and questioned how an inmate was able to get a hold of a knife, and they were told that all of the inmates in the boot factory had access to cutting tools, but they needed to be returned by the end of the work shift. The knife that Travis had was a smaller knife used for trimming shoes. The prison that had only been open for a little over 10 years had over 40 serious attacks against prison staff within the last year, and the last guard to have passed away was in 1999. In an attempt to avoid the death penalty and get a lesser sentence, Travis chose to plead guilty. When trial began, the judge tried to explain to him that because of who he killed, his case was automatically considered for the death penalty. Pleading guilty would not help him in any way, and instead, it would further incriminate him and give the jury more of a reason to agree on the sentence of death. "Mr. Runnels, you have entered a plea of guilty to the offense charged in the indictment before this jury. Several things come into play at this point that I need to visit with you about. First of all, because this is a case in which the state has indicted it's seeking the death penalty, it's not a situation where any jury trial can ever be waived. You understand that?" "Yes, sir." The judge then went on to say, "And that's why the jury is here. However, your plea of guilty before the jury, you need to understand, sir, that if you persist in that plea, and I find that the plea is voluntary and that you have done it with the full knowledge of the results of your plea of guilty, I'll instruct the jury to return in accordance with your plea of finding of guilt. Do you understand that?" Again, Travis replied by saying, "Yes, sir." That instruction will preclude them from even having the opportunity to consider whether the state has met its burden of proof. Your plea of guilty in this case, and this doesn't differ from any other criminal case, will be all the evidence that's necessary to support the finding of guilt. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir." "But there will not be an issue of your guilt or innocence. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir." "You understand that you still maintain all the rights and privileges that you enjoy under the Constitution and laws of the state of Texas and of the United States, but with regard to the jury being able to consider guilt-innocent stage of this trial, that will not be one of them. You still have the right against self-incrimination, You're not going to have to testify in this case. And I only tell you that because there have been cases in the past where people have said, well, my entering a plea of guilty to the jury is really, in effect, testifying, and nobody told me that I didn't have to do that. And our Court of Criminal Appeals has said, no, that's not the case. But under Texas law and the United States constitutional law, but I'm telling you that just to give you a heads up on that, all right? And you're still going to be able to, call witnesses of your own, cross-examine witnesses, have all of the witnesses testify in front of you. Nothing is going to change in this trial with regard to all of your rights other than the ability of the jury to require the state and your ability to require the state to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt with regard to your guilt or innocence. Do you understand what I've told you? After replying with a final yes, sir, Travis's legal team gave the judge signed documents that stated that Travis voluntarily chose to plead guilty. Travis was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to death, but during one of his appeals, he argued that the judge confused him by saying he would be able to bring forth witnesses. He thought the purpose of the witnesses would help him get a lesser sentence, but they read the transcripts word for word when the judge explained his guilty plea, so they denied his appeal. They also provided evidence during the appeal in which Travis's defense team chose not to call their witnesses to the stand. The judge had even sworn in all of the witnesses, but the attorney said, "Your Honor, for the record, we will invoke the rule. Our witnesses are under subpoena for the 31st, and they will be instructed as to the rule." The record reflects that the appellant did not object to the trial court's remarks. Indeed, defense counsel noted that he had witnesses under subpoena, However, when the state rested, defense counsel chose not to call any witnesses. During trial, a prison investigator testified that if Travis received life in prison, he would be placed back in general population and would most likely continue to hurt other inmates and guards. During an appeal, Travis's defense team stated that the investigator had provided false evidence before, which led to 2 inmates' death sentences being overturned to life in prison, but Travis's fate was not the same. December 11, 2019 was Travis's execution day, and he was 46 years old. At 7 o'clock that evening, the U.S. Supreme Court denied his final appeal for a stay of execution, and 4 minutes later, he was given 1 dose of pentobarbital. He had 3 witnesses in support of him watching the execution, and the victim's sister and brother-in-law were also witnesses to the execution. Travis declined to give any last words, but seconds before he fell unconscious, he let out a woof woof, and he was pronounced dead at 7:26 p.m.
What do you do every day?
Well, every day is just a repeat of the last, you know? You do stuff, you try to pass the time, but it's not comfortable. You just press through.
Mark Asay was born in 1964 and was raised in Florida. At an early age, he developed racist views and became a white supremacist. Although he claimed once upon a time that white was right, he often dabbled in overdrinking and going to downtown areas known for having transvestite hookers and receiving sexual favors from transvestites that were minorities. One man by the name of Robert McDowell was a street worker who was known in town and by the community as Rene Torres. Mark knew Rene, met him on multiple occasions, and referred to him as Rene. One day, the two met, and Mark claimed that Rene stole money from him one time, and he promised the next time he ever saw Rene, he was going to beat him up. Mark ended up getting into trouble and was convicted of capital felony murder and released on parole. In 1987, now 23 years old, Mark continued to get in trouble and was unable to let go of his old ways. On July 17, 1987, Mark, his brother Robbie, and their friend Bubba went to a local bar to play pool and drink. All 3 had multiple beers, and when it hit midnight, the trio left to go to a different bar. They stayed at the second bar until they closed at 2 a.m. Robbie had plans of hooking up with a girl he had his eyes on at the bar, so Mark and Bubba drove around for a bit to give Robbie some space and time with the girl. When Mark and Bubba returned to the bar, they met up with Robbie, who told them the girl was not interested in doing anything with him. Bubba then suggested that all of them go to downtown to find prostitutes and he would pay for all of them. Robbie left in his truck and Mark and Bubba left in Mark's truck. Even though they were in Mark's car, Bubba was the designated driver. Robbie made it to downtown first, and when Bubba and Mark spotted Robbie, they noticed he was talking to a black man by the name of Robert Lee Booker. They called him a man, but Robert was a transvestite dressed up as a woman that night. Robbie was asking Robert about finding more prostitutes, and for some reason, Mark did not like the tone Robert had with his brother Robbie. Mark got out of his car and told Robbie not to take any crap from him. "You know you ain't got to take no crap from these." Robbie tried to reassure his brother that everything was fine, but Mark did not listen. Mark got in Robert's face, started screaming racial slurs at him, and pointing his finger in Robert's face. Robert told him to get his finger out of his face, and Mark responded by saying, He then pulled his gun from his back pocket and shot Robert multiple times. Robert ran off and hid under a porch, but immediately succumbed to his wounds and died. Robbie drove off and Bubba tried to drive off as well, but Mark jumped in the back of the truck. Bubba asked why he shot Robert, and Mark replied by saying, "Because you got to show a d***er who was boss." Bubba asked Mark if he thought Robert was dead, and Mark replied by saying, "No, I just scared the crap out of him." Not fazed at all that Mark had shot someone, the men continued their search in the hopes of finding a prostitute. After some time driving, Mark noticed Robert McDowell, not to be confused with Mark's first victim, Robert Lee Booker. Robert McDowell, a.k.a. Rene Torres. Mark told Bubba that he knew Rene and would give them favors. They pulled over and the men negotiated the price for Rene's services. They paid $1,000 for Rene's services. Bubba asked Mark if he thought Robert was dead, and Mark replied by saying, "No, I just scared the crap out of him." Not fazed at all that Mark had shot someone, the men continued their search in the hopes of finding a prostitute. After some time driving, Mark noticed Robert McDowell, not to be confused with Mark's first victim, Robert Lee Booker. Robert McDowell, a.k.a. Rene Torres. Mark told Bubba that he knew Rene and would give them favors. They pulled over and the men negotiated the price for Rene's services. Bubba then drove to the alley and Renee followed the truck on foot. Bubba and Mark stayed in the car, but Renee refused to get in the car with both of them in it, so Mark got out of the truck and agreed to be the lookout. When Renee was about to get into the truck, Mark pulled his arm and shot him 6 times. Mark quickly got back in the truck and told Bubba to drive off. Shots were heard and someone called 911. Shortly after Renee died, he was found in an alley by responding officers. Mark had no issues communicating with other people about who he shot and why. He told his friend Charlie Moore in front of Charlie's cousin Danny that him, his brother, and Bubba were out looking for hookers, and when he spotted Renee, he initially wanted to have sex before he shot him.
What can you tell me about the murder of Robert McDowell?
That just happened as I was having a meltdown, apparently. That's all I can say. And we were sociable, and he did take money from me one time. When I see him, I'm going to kick his.
But you did shoot him?
I did shoot him.
How many times did you shoot him?
It's reported that he was shot 6 times.
Even though Bubba and Robbie did not go to authorities after witnessing 2 murders, Charlie and Danny did go to authorities after watching a television Crime Watch segment on Renee being killed. With the help of Charlie and Danny, Mark was arrested and indicted on 2 counts of murder. While awaiting trial, Mark was in jail and confided with his cellmate Thomas Gross. Mark told Thomas that he was charged for murdering 2 people. He also told Thomas that the people he killed were black and he quote-unquote shot those. Of course, Thomas was looking for a deal, so agreed to testify against his cellmate for the upcoming trial. When trial began, Thomas told the court that Mark showed him newspaper clippings of his crimes and showed off his white power tattoos. At the conclusion of Mark's trial, a jury found him guilty of murdering Robert McDowell and Robert Lee Booker. The reasons behind the jury recommending death were because, number 1, Mark was under sentence of imprisonment at the time of the murders and had been previously convicted of a capital felony. Secondly, they felt that Mark committed murder in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner. Mark was officially sentenced to death on November 18, 1988. Mark was only 23 with such an extensive record, and his behavior was not getting better as he got older. I want to make a quick mention that Mark believed that both of his victims were black. Even in the first appeal documents, the courts referred to Robert McDowell as a black man, and in a second appeal, the court apologized for that error after finding out that Robert McDowell was of mixed race. He was half white and half Hispanic. There were appeals over the years, with one point being that Mark wanted the trial judge disqualified based off of some of the comments he made during trial. All of Mark's appeals were rejected, dismissed, or denied. On July 3, 2017, Governor Rick Scott signed Mark's execution warrant, which marked almost 30 years since he was sentenced.
You know, what kept me going was I believed that maybe someday this would be resolved in my favor.
You know, there's fear that if you were let out, you might do the same thing again.
Of course. I've witnessed it myself. I've seen people get out of prison and repeat the offense. There's no question about that. That fear comes true all too often. But by the same token, people treat that proposition as though they've never heard of a first-time offender. You know, there's people running around on the street now who have never been in trouble with the law, who are about to commit a violent crime. You see, so that argument, you know, is a bit specious, you know. But I do believe that people need to have some sort of rehabilitation. They need to be made to face the truth about how they behaved and how their behavior has impacted society. I never, ever in my life owned a gun until June 12th, 1987. And 35 days later, I shot somebody with it, you know. And all I'm saying is having it is the opportunity to use it, which is the opportunity to spend the rest of your life in prison because of it. So don't do it.
There were no final stays of execution, and for Mark's last meal, he had fried ham, fried pork chops, French fries, vanilla swirl ice cream, and cola. He refused to make a final statement before his execution, and he was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m. Mark made history, and 2017 marked the year where the first white man was executed for killing a black man in the state of Florida. Thank you all for watching another episode of Death Row Executions. Mark reminds me of my story on Robert vanhook, who tried to say he experienced a gay panic. He struggled with his sexuality and talked down on gays, but enjoyed them. Mark claimed to have hated black people and gays, but only looked for transvestite hookers who he thought were black.
He was just there that day and decided to come home and never made it.
You're now 69 years old.
I'm 69.
Still awaiting justice.
Still awaiting justice. Justice, I feel, will be served, but if it doesn't, then I know the justice system has failed us.
How does it make you feel to know that this man's life will be ended in 48 hours?
Oh, it makes, to tell you the truth, it relieves me a lot. It takes a lot of pressure off of me and off the family, because we have been waiting all these years for this to happen.
Will you be there on Thursday?
I would love to, but I suffer myself, and I wouldn't want to pass out there because I suffer from seizures. My sisters, some of them might be there.
You know, he continues to deny that he's the one who pulled the trigger. Do you believe that?
No, I don't. I don't, because he's the type of person that would take a life and not think twice about it. He has that mentality. So a person with that type of mentality, I think that should be put off the face of the earth.
If any, what words do you have for Mark?
All I have to say to him is, you know what you did, now it's your time. You can imagine how my brother felt.
Hello everyone, so this month I will be focusing on people who were sentenced to death for hate crimes based on race, sexuality, and or religion. Today's story is on Dylan Roof, who is currently on death row for his hate crimes.
Well, to begin with, I was at the church all day that Wednesday. We had meetings and everything, and I told my son not to come because we were going to cancel Bible study because of all the meetings. But after the meeting, we decided to have Bible study. The last text I have from my son is, "Mother, are we having Bible study?" And I told him, yeah. We started Bible study, and must be 5 minutes after we started, Dylan Roof walked in, and we thought he was just a child coming in to study the Bible because he was calm and everything. We actually didn't see him looking weird or anything because my church is right by the College Charleston, so it's not unusual that we have Caucasians coming to the church.
Was he acting weird? Did he strike you?
No, he sat with us really calm and everything. And we went through the Bible, and he actually engaged twice with us. And toward the end of Bible study, we were closing out. And right as we closed our eyes to pray, the bullets started going off. And I actually told my son played dead too, but as Dylan Roof was walking through the room, my son knew that we were still alive, and he lifted up. He was already wounded.
He was already wounded, and he engaged Dylan Roof. He said, "You don't have to do this."
My son asked him why are you doing this? And he said he had to. And my son said, "You do not have to do this. We mean you no harm." I survived being under the table 77 shots.
Whoa. Yeah, I mean, I went to that church in Charleston, and I did it.
You did what? Well, you, I mean,
Dylan Storm Roof was born on April 3, 1994 in South Carolina to Franklin Bennett Roof and Amelia Cowles. His parents were married, but they had already divorced in 1991. They reconciled for a short while, which is when they conceived Dylan. Their reconciliation was short-lived, and by the time Dylan turned 5, his father Franklin remarried. Franklin was working as a construction contractor who specialized in renovating historic homes. Dylan's father and grandfather, who was a successful lawyer, lived in neighborhoods with people of all races. Franklin also liked to throw parties and often invited blacks and Hispanics to these parties. Amelia, on the other hand, who worked as a bartender, lived in a rural community that was predominantly white. Dylan spent majority of his time going back and forth with each parent, and it's been documented that in his first 9 years of schooling, he attended 7 different schools. Some teachers even described him as a transient. He was never violent, and although described as nice, some people did think there was something dark about him. Dylan liked to spend hours sitting on different curbs in the community and just watch as life passed by. He would also offer to help people with their yard work, but it did not stop people from thinking that he was strange. When Dylan became a teenager, both of his parents faced financial issues. His father, who was once very successful, had to file for bankruptcy, and his mother was evicted from her home in 2009. This is when Dylan began to struggle much more with his schooling. He started 9th grade, but because of his failing grades, he had to retake the whole grade again. Now in his 2nd year of 9th grade and home life spiraling out of control, he decided to drop out. After dropping out, he began to drink and smoke more, and he had also acquired many odd jobs. His mother said that at times he would cut the neighbor's grass but would spend everything he made on weed. She also noticed something was wrong with him before he dropped out, and a friend of hers told her that maybe Dylan was just bored. Even though Dylan's previous principals and teachers went on record and said that Dylan saw black the same as he saw white while he was in school, he ended up growing a fascination for white supremacy. Dylan attended racially integrated schools and even had a best friend who was of mixed race by the name of Caleb Brown. Caleb said that Dylan learned he was half black after the class had to do an assignment about their heritage. Dylan asked Caleb about his heritage, and Caleb said that after finding out about his race, Dylan did not treat him any different. Dylan and Caleb's mothers became friends and always had the boys hanging out so that they could play video games or ride their skateboards around. They weren't the most popular kids growing up, but Caleb said Dylan never seemed bothered by that. During the times Dylan was spending time with his father, his stepmother Paige Mann was usually the one to watch and look after him because his father would be out of town on business trips for up to 4 days. Paige was quoted saying, "Dylan was a loner, very quiet and very smart. Too smart. He was locked in his room looking up bad stuff on the computer. Something on the computer drew him in. This is internet evil." These evil websites were white supremacist websites that planted evil thoughts into Dylan's head. After Dylan dropped out of school, he lost contact with a lot of friends until he created a Facebook. He was able to get in touch with an old friend, 20-year-old Joseph Meek Jr. Joseph lived at home with his mother, Kimberly Conzi, and his younger brother, Jacob. Jacob said that sometimes he would hear Dylan on the phone with his dad, pretending to be at work, but his father wouldn't know he was at their house and that he had quit his job. Dylan would sleep on their couch, and being that he was the only one with a car, he would help them out with transportation. One day, Joseph, Jacob, and Dylan watched a documentary on Martin Luther King Jr., and they all bonded over how happy they were that he died. They began talking about Trayvon Martin, and Dylan got upset with Jacob because he used the words African American instead of a racial slur. George Zimmerman was the first man to actually inspire Dylan when he killed Trayvon. The boys bonded over their hate, and Joseph noticed that Dylan seemed emotionless. In the year 2015, the same year Dylan committed his crimes that landed him on death row, he had at least 2 run-ins with the law. In February 2015, Dylan went to a local shopping mall dressed in all black, asking different workers when they would be leaving. This scared some of the workers, so they notified the police. When police caught up to him, he had prescription drugs on him that were used to treat opiate addiction, and they charged him with a misdemeanor. Weeks later, Dylan was loitering at a park, and he was recognized by an off-duty officer who saw him when he was charged the previous month. When police questioned him and searched his car, they found parts to a semi-automatic rifle. That day, Dylan was off the hook and he wasn't charged with anything. After his first run-ins with the law, Dylan created a website on February 9th, 2015 called thelastRhodesian.com. The website contained images of him holding a Confederate flag and/or a gun. There were also other images that depicted images of his support in white power groups. He also included images of him burning or spitting on the American flag. Some of these images were taken at Dylan's house, and it was later discovered that some images were taken at multiple slave-related historical sites in North and South Carolina. Some images were taken at graveyards of Confederates, some of slaves, plantations, and museums. Along with all of the disturbing images on his website, he also included his very own manifesto, which was separated into different sections of groups of people. The sections were titled Blacks, Jews, Hispanics, and East Asians. In these sections, he expressed his unwavering beliefs and opinions. He also had sections titled Patriotism and an Explanation. He mentioned that he was awakened by the killing of Trayvon Martin, and went on to say that Zimmerman was in the right and did not know what the big issue was. In his opinion, he also did not like how there was black-on-white crime and not enough white-on-black crime. A section of his website reads, "I have no choice. I am not in the position to, alone, go into the ghetto and fight. I chose Charleston because it's the most historic city in my state and at one time had the highest ratio of blacks to whites in the country. We have no skinheads, no real KKK, no one doing anything but talking on the internet. Well, someone has to have the bravery to take it to the real world, and I guess that has to be me." Segregation in his mind was also a good thing. He was quoted writing, "Integration has done nothing but bring whites down to the level of brute animals." Getting more motivated with his mission, in April 2015, Dylan was arrested at the same shopping mall he got in trouble at back in February. Mall workers and security recognized him and his distinct look. He was banned from the mall for a year and he was convicted of trespassing. Dylan was back on the streets, and in that same month, Dylan went to a gun store in West Columbia to buy a .45 caliber gun. Dylan was not working at the time, but he was given money by his father on April 3rd, which was his 21st birthday. Dylan was able to get this handgun despite his convictions, and more specifically, his conviction of drug possession. The gun store was at fault for not doing a proper background check. In early June of 2015, Dylan was talking to Joseph and ended up going on a rant about Trayvon and the people who were in support of him. He then started going on about a black man by the name of Freddie Gray who was killed while in custody. He felt that blacks were getting in the way of white success and that there were too many blacks in the world. Too many blacks meant that they were taking over. He then expressed to multiple people that he intended to kill as many black people as possible and wanted to start with killing people at the College of Charleston. The many people he told all kept quiet and never went to authorities because they did not think Dylan was honest about his intentions. Him wanting racial division in America and being okay with using violence to get what he wanted wasn't enough for them either. Around June 10th, one of Dylan's African-American friends, who expressed that Dylan was never rude to him, said that Dylan told him that he would commit a shooting at a college the next week. Dylan then went to another friend's house to retrieve a gun that his friend had been holding or hiding from him. The friend said he knew of Dylan's plans to shoot up a school, but believed that Dylan changed his mind because the school had security. He also claimed that they initially took Dylan's gun from him to prevent him from shooting anyone, but he gave it back to Dylan because one of his friends was on probation and could not be around guns. Dylan settled on putting his plans into motion on the evening of June 17, 2015, when he ditched his plans at the college and made his way to downtown Charleston. This is also the last day he made modifications to his website. The exact time of his modification was at 4:44 p.m. on June 17, 2015, and he made a post that said, "At the time writing, I am in a great hurry." Just what exactly was he in a hurry for? He saw a predominantly African-American church called Emmanuel African Methodist Church. That evening, church members were conducting a Bible study, and while all of them were peacefully going about their night, Dylan walked into the church. With no hate in their hearts or no questions as to why he was in the church, the parishioners greeted him. After being greeted, Dylan opened fire. One survivor by the name of Felicia Sanders claimed that when Dylan started shooting, she grabbed her relative and told her to play dead. As they were pretending to be dead, she was able to feel warm blood flowing on both sides of her body. She was quoted saying, "I was just waiting on my turn." Her adult son, despite being scared, stood up while Dylan was shooting and asked him, "Why are you doing this?" Dylan replied by saying, "I have to do this because y'all hurting our women and taking over the world." After he finished saying what he had to say, he shot her son 5 times. Dylan ended up killing 9 people in total, and when he was done, he calmly walked out of the church and drove away in his car. It was now June 18th, and Dylan was still on the run. He filled up on gas at a Shell gas station and withdrew some cash at an ATM in order to buy some water and a bag of Doritos. This happened at around 6 in the morning, which was around the same time police put out a photo of Dylan. The murders were considered a hate crime, so the FBI came in to help investigate and capture Dylan. He was now 245 miles away from the church in Shelby, North Carolina, on his way to Nashville, Tennessee, because he said he had never been there before. A florist by the name of Debbie Dills recognized Dylan from a picture and followed him for 35 miles. She asked her boss to notify the police, and when they caught up to them, they pulled Dylan over on the highway in his black Hyundai. When responding officers walked to the driver's window, Dylan casually rolled down his window, handed his ID over, and let them know he was Dylan Roof. When officers searched his car, they noticed a Confederate flag in his car, along with a burned U.S. flag, a gun, an empty box of ammo, a note with names of different churches on it, and a laser attachment for a gun. He had no issues telling police that he wanted to start a race war. He also communicated that the people at the church were very nice to him, and he almost had second thoughts, but he needed to follow through with his plans, and he did not feel bad about it. While in the police vehicle and on the way to the jail, Dylan complained of being hungry, so officers treated him to a Burger King meal before driving to their destination. Police Chief Jeff Ledford said in regards to the Burger King stop that Dylan was very quiet, very calm, and he sat down very quietly. He was not problematic. Dylan was eventually taken into custody and questioned by the FBI. During the interrogation, FBI agents informed Dylan that he had killed 9 people. He thought he killed less people and said that he felt bad. He did admit, however, that he had been planning the attack for 6 months.
Can you tell us about what happened last night?
Well, yeah, I mean, I went to that church in Charleston, and, I did it.
You did what? Well, you, I mean, I know it's tough sometimes to say.
It's not that I don't want to say it because I don't want to make myself seem guilty. I just don't really like saying it. You know?
But I know sometimes we have to face those things, the realities. You know.
We don't want to put any words in your mouth. That's why.
Right.
That's why Agent Stansbury just was asking you what it exactly is that you did do.
Well, I killed. Well, I guess. I mean, I don't really know.
Well,
I mean, I don't know how many people or anything like that.
So did you shoot them?
Yes.
What kind of gun did you use?
A Glock 45.
Okay. Do you know how many people you shot?
If I was gonna guess, five, maybe. I'm really not sure.
Right before, or when you pulled out your gun and started to shoot, or right before, did you remember what you said, or if you said anything to the people when you pulled? Because I mean,
oh no, I didn't.
If you suddenly pulled out a gun and I'm like,
right, that's what I did. I didn't say anything to them before I pulled it out.
Did they?
Not even one word. I didn't say anything to them.
Did they see or anybody react to you as you pulled the gun out, or were you already shooting before they knew what was happening?
I mean, they reacted after I shot.
Yeah,
right, we understand.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess my question, and it might have been a bad question, I was just trying to figure out, sometimes if I suddenly found a gun, but if I pulled a gun out and everybody saw it, people might start to run or whatever.
Oh, no, it was very fast. It was not like I was like, it was like quick motion.
So can you show what were you sitting down and you did it, or did you stand up, or what?
Yeah, I was sitting down the first.
Can you show me like what you did? I mean.
Yeah, it was just like,
Did you like this, or just?
Yeah, like,
And just started shooting it?
Yeah.
At people? And we'll go back and I'll ask you some more questions.
You know, and then I was sitting there and I was like, you know, just thinking about whether I should do it or not. You know, and that's why I was sitting there for 15 minutes, just like, you know, like, because I know I could have just walked out, you know, because they didn't say anything to me about what, you know, the thing on my belt. So I could have walked out, you know, and that's what I was just thinking, you know. But then I just, you know, like, I just, like, I don't know, just like, not, you want to say spur of the moment, but, you know, I just finally decided I had to do it. And that's pretty much it.
Well, that goes to the next question. Why did you have to do it?
Oh, I had to do it.
How come? I mean, that's what I don't want to know. I mean,
well, I had to do it because somebody had to do something.
Dylan, when you said you had to do this, so basically what you're...
I had to do it because nobody else is going to do it. Nobody else is brave enough to do anything about it, you know. Back in the late 80s and the early 90s, you know, we had skinheads and stuff like that. There's no skinheads left. There's no KKK. KKK never did anything anyway.
So basically you were trying to make a statement or prove a point on behalf of the white race, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, in a way.
The same night of his capture, Dylan waived his extradition rights and he was taken to the Cannon Detention Center in North Charleston. He was in a cell close to Michael Slager, who was a North Charleston police officer in jail because he was charged with first-degree murder. The following day, on June 19, 2015, Dylan was officially charged with 9 counts of murder and 1 count of possession of a firearm during the commission of a violent crime. In the past, I have told stories of a person committing a federal crime in a non-death penalty state, but because it is a federal crime, they still had a death penalty trial in that state. Dylan committed a crime where the state had the death penalty, and the federal crime was the fact that it was a hate crime. Dylan also became the first person to be sentenced to death for a hate crime. Dylan's initial court appearance was held by a video conference, and he had a bond hearing later that same day. At the Charleston County Court, victims' family members and survivors of the shooting were able to speak to Dylan and let him know that they forgave him and were praying for him. Judge James Gosnell Jr., who was presiding over the hearing, listened to the testimonies and concluded the court hearing by saying, "There are victims on this young man's side of the family. Nobody would have ever thrown them into the whirlwind of event that they are being thrown into." Although Dylan was given a $1 million bond for the weapons possession charge, even if someone was able to bail him out, he would be stuck in jail because for the charge of 9 counts of murder, he was offered no bail at all. Also, despite what the innocent people were saying during the court hearing, Governor Nikki Haley urged prosecutors to seek the death penalty. The following month, on July 7, 2015, Dylan was indicted on 3 more charges of attempted murder because 3 victims had survived the shooting. Weeks later, District Attorney Scarlett Wilson made it known that she would be seeking the death penalty, and with this knowledge, Dylan consulted with his attorneys and agreed to plead guilty in order to try and avoid the death penalty. Dylan's trial was postponed multiple times over the next couple of years. The state trial started first, and Dylan's attorneys had Dylan plead guilty as an insurance policy. They figured he would get sentenced to death in federal court, so just in case his federal case was overturned, he would be able to live out the rest of his days in prison because the state would sentence him to life with the guilty plea. Their insurance policy worked, and Dylan was sentenced to 9 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for his state trial. As for Dylan's federal case, he pled not guilty to the 33 federal charges against him. He was charged with 9 counts of using a firearm to commit murder and 24 civil rights violations, 12 for hate crimes that fell under the Matthew Shepard and James Beard Hate Crimes Prevention Act, and the other 12 counts were under the second hate crime statute that prohibits using force or threatening the use of force to obstruct a person's free exercise of religious beliefs. Dylan wanted to plead guilty when he was indicted, but was urged by his lawyer not to because only 18 of the 33 charges carried the death penalty, and he wasn't fully sure whether or not the government would aim to seek the death penalty. On June 9, 2016, Dylan expressed to his lawyers that he did not want to be tried by a jury but by a judge who would determine his fate. Unfortunately for Dylan, a judge denied his request because for federal cases, the prosecution has to give consent for a bench trial, and the prosecution did not give consent. Because of that rejection, Dylan's lawyers filed a motion saying the federal laws were unconstitutional, but that motion was dismissed. The federal trial officially began on December 7, 2016, with the jury consisting of 3 black people and 9 white people. The jury got to see Dylan's confession tape, and there were also expert witnesses who testified as well. On December 15, 2016, a jury found Dylan guilty on all 33 federal crime counts after deliberating for just 2 hours. Dylan fired his lawyers and wanted to be at the sentencing hearing alone. The judge warned him that it was not in his best interest, but Dylan did not care about what was best to avoid the death penalty. Dylan's lawyers did not like this sudden switch, so they filed a motion saying he was incompetent to stand trial. So on January 3rd, there was a competency hearing, and the judge presiding over the case said, "After fully considering all of the evidence presented, the court ruled from the bench that the defendant remains competent to stand trial and to self-represent." Although a doctor concluded that Dylan showed no empathy after hearing him say he did not identify with the victims and didn't care, and that he exhibited signs of autism, anxiety, and schizoid personality disorder, it did not mean he did not know the difference between right and wrong. Dylan wanted to suppress the information of anything that would make him seem inferior or less than. He felt that it would ruin his reputation if that information got out. After his federal trial was over, a jury recommended death, and the very next day, on January 11, 2017, the judge officially sentenced Dylan Roof to death. Dylan was then transferred from Charleston County Jail to federal death row at Terre Haute on April 22, 2017. In 2020, Dylan appealed his death sentence, saying that because he represented himself, his attorneys were unable to present evidence of his mental illnesses. Dylan was the one who initially fought for his attorneys to be dropped and to self-represent, so on August 25, 2021, his appeal was rejected. Dylan was represented by attorneys again, and they appealed the judge's ruling on the appeal, but that was declined by a federal court as well. To date, that is the last update regarding Dylan Roof. Ronald Taylor was born on September 30th, 1960. Between the years of 1990 and 1999, Ronald had been treated multiple times for his mental health issues. A couple of those hospitals were Mayview Hospital and St. Francis Hospital. During that time frame, Ronald was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and there is no documentation on whether or not he took medication for his schizophrenia. By the year 2000, Ronald was living in an apartment at 1208 Wood Street in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. One day, while living in his new place, Ronald was feeling in the dumps and thought he would not make it to see the next day. He wrote a 4-page letter for anyone who would read it. The title of the letter read, "Whoever reads this should feel free to contact former counselors to let them know I finally followed through with my plan." His letter was unorganized and contained uppercase and lowercase letters throughout the words, but it went on to read, "To my family, starting with you, mother who I love so much. I know this will probably destroy your life, but I've been suffering physically for too long. I've been experiencing so many different health problems from the time that I was born till now. I've been patient year after year, decade after decade with my health, but I decided to end it all. So, Jesus Christ, you no good, heartless, evil bias, favoritism, Jewish, cold blood, and most of all, the entire world. I'm sorry, Mother, for with your gun that I sneaked for the second time in 2 years. Try to understand when a person is physically suffering for a long time, and I'm treated by racist, biased doctors and nurses who so often give me generic, cheap medication that is ineffective and causes return visits to emergency rooms. That frustration so often sets in. I get fed up with doctors treating black patients differently from whites in terms of unfairness, unequally, and like dirt. Jesus Christ made a very costly mistake putting white people on the face of the earth. I'll see all of my enemies in hell. Ha 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 ha. As long as the system remains racist white and racist Jew, black people will never overcome. Poor blacks will remain poor, with no hope as God continues to look down on us with complete neglect and no intervention. Ronald then mentions more about whites, Jews, Asians, Italians, white police officers, feds, and Uncle Tom blacks. He praises some questionable people in his letter and calls America the United Snakes of America. With Ronald's mental state, it seemed like everything set him off. Supposedly, there had been a long-running dispute over Ronald's broken door, and Ronald felt that the 2 maintenance workers, John Kroll or JK, and John DeWitt, aka JD, were taking too long to attempt to fix his door. It is unclear if Ronald was experiencing delusions or negative effects of his schizophrenia, but Ronald felt as if the two maintenance workers, who also happened to be white, were racist and against him. Ronald was quoted calling JD and JK racist white pigs and dirty white trash. Finally, on March 1st, 2000, in what seemed like forever to Ronald, JD and JK finally started working on Ronald's door. Not only did they take long to start working on his door, but Ronald grew more angry and frustrated because he felt they were taking too long to fix his door that day. JD responded to Ronald and told him that people like him are the reason there is racial tension in the world. After making his statement, JD knelt down on the ground in order to pick up some of his tools that were in the hallway outside of the apartment's front entrance. When JD knelt down, Ronald stood over him and gave JD an angry look. After noticing Ronald's behavior, JD stood up with a hammer by his side. Looking at JD, Ronald said to him, "You think you're pretty tough?" Ronald left, but he was not able to refrain from the negative tension for long and returned back to his place. Upon returning, he said to JD, "You're a dead man. You have to come back to this building." JK and JD then left Ronald's specific apartment and then left for the apartment building's basement. In the basement was fellow maintenance worker Andrew Williams, who was noted in court documents to have been an African-American man. John DeWitt left John Kroll and Andrew in order to assist a different resident with their maintenance request. Ronald returned to his empty apartment and equipped himself with his mother's .22 caliber revolver. The revolver, along with ammunition, was placed in a small pouch. After equipping himself with the gun and ammo, Ronald put lighter fluid on his couch, lit it, and then left the apartment, leaving the door wide open. Leaving the fire to spread, Ronald went looking for JD. He was searching everywhere and could not find him. He finally made his way to the apartment's basement and yelled out, "Where are you, I'm going to get you. I got something for you." Andrew and JK noticed the brown pouch Ronald had that had his gun in it, so they pleaded with Ronald not to do anything he would regret. Their pleas meant nothing, and Ronald ended up pulling out his gun and shouting multiple times, "I got something for you." He then went to the boiler room hoping to see JD, but there was no one there. Ronald, angered that he could not find JD, left the basement, but JK and Andrew were following him and begging him to calm down. Ronald stopped in his tracks, turned around to face the maintenance workers, and then fatally shot JK in the chest. Ronald then left the apartment complex and made his way to a nearby Burger King by foot. The fire in his apartment had reached his ceiling and the hallway, but the fire department arrived fairly quickly, and they were able to put out the fire fast enough so that no one was injured. Sitting inside of a booth at the Burger King was a 71-year-old white man by the name of Joseph Healy. Ronald made his way to Joseph and, without speaking a word, fatally shot him in the back of the head. Joseph was a retired priest and spent his time reading to children every day, which earned him the nickname Storytelling Joe. Ronald casually walked out of the Burger King and then walked to a nearby McDonald's where he saw a white male by the name of Richard Klinger sitting alone in his van. Ronald shot Richard, and although Richard survived his gunshot wound, he suffered permanent brain damage and he was paralyzed on the right side of his body. After shooting Richard, Ronald walked into the McDonald's where he saw 26-year-old manager Stephen Bustard. Ronald walked behind the counter and shot Stephen in the head. Stephen also survived his gunshot wound to the head, but he did suffer permanent injuries. Ronald then left the McDonald's and walked towards the cars that were waiting in the drive-thru line. He saw another white male named Emil Sanielvici. Ronald put his head through the passenger window to look inside of his car. He ended up walking away, but Emil rolled down his window to ask Ronald what he wanted. This angered Ronald, and he shouted back, "What do I want? What do I want?" He walked towards the driver's side of Emil's car and fatally shot him from a couple of feet away. By this time, many witnesses were calling 911, and Ronald knew authorities would be looking for him. He made his way to a nearby apartment complex at 416 Ross Street and bumped into a random tenant. Ronald Taylor told Ronald Washington to come here, but Washington refused. He changed his mind, though, as soon as he noticed the gun. Ronald Taylor then said, "This isn't for you, it was for these crackers." Ronald then reloaded his gun on a set of stairs and went into an apartment of a black woman by the name of Christine McCrae. Christine lived on the ground floor and left her back door open, which is why Ronald was able to easily get inside. When Christine spotted him, Ronald told her to be quiet for a few minutes while he collected himself. He then told Christine that he was just out to get white people. Ronald asked Christine if she had any guns or a car he could use. She replied by saying no. He then asked her if there were any white people who lived in the building, and she replied that she did not know. With that, Ronald walked up to Christine, kissed her on the forehead, and left the apartment. Wilkinsburg police officers Daniel Kufi and Michael Minson were looking for a suspect and had noticed Ronald crossing the street. They did not know at the time that he was the shooter they were looking for. The officers actually stopped their police vehicle to let Ronald cross the street, but Ronald was unaware of the fact that the cops did not know he was the shooter, so instead of proceeding to walk away, he turned around and shot the officers. Ronald let off 3 shots before he ran off into the Penn West building and into the offices of the Metro Family Medical Practice. The first person he saw was a white female receptionist by the name of Patricia. Ronald walked up to her, hushed her, and then asked if there was anyone else in the office. She told him there was another female in the file room. Upon receiving that information, Ronald grabbed Patricia and led her to the file room where the other employee, Debbie, was. A white female nurse named Joyce Ambrose then walked into the file room and asked Ronald if he needed help with anything. By this time, a black employee named Bill Simonton was close by, and Ronald made eye contact with him and said, "She doesn't know what time it is." Ronald then took Patricia, Debbie, and Joyce down the hall at gunpoint. He left Bill and another black employee alone. Once in the hallway, Ronald said to the women, "You don't know how many people I've killed. I just killed 5 people. I have 1 bullet left, and I'm going to use it on one of you. I just don't know which one it will be." Ronald began toying with the women and waving the gun back and forth. Minutes later, a black employee by the name of Barbara Pippins walked into the hallway, but Ronald immediately told her, "You're okay, sister. Get out of here." After Barbara walked away, Ronald decided to shoot Debbie and pointed the gun at her head. He then said, "You look like a smart white." Ronald changed his mind, lowered his gun, and said, "No, I think I'll terrorize you for a while. Come on." Debbie pleaded with Ronald, and in that moment, Ronald saw another employee by the name of Dr. David Freeman walk into the examination room. Ronald went to go look for Dr. Freeman, which gave the women who were held captive the opportunity to escape. While this was happening, a police officer by the name of Paul Tomko entered the building in order to help everybody evacuate. Eventually, Officer Tomko was face to face with Ronald. Ronald pointed his gun at the officer and then at himself. He asked multiple times how many people he was able to kill that day, and he also brought up racism and God. Police Sergeant and Negotiation Specialist John Fisher entered the building, and he was speaking with Ronald for hours in an attempt to get him to lower his weapon and end the standoff. Officer Fisher asked Ronald what happened that day, and Ronald replied by saying that JD, he pushed me too far today. He went overboard. I couldn't take it anymore, that white trucker. He then admitted to Officer Fisher that he was the one who set his apartment on fire and told him, "You tell JD that he's lucky I didn't get to him today. He's lucky he got away." Officer Fisher's efforts were successful, and Ronald finally surrendered and was immediately taken to the police station. Media had gathered around to get a shot of the killer that was just captured, and a friendly officer asked Ronald whether or not he wanted his face covered. Ronald replied by saying, "I'm proud of what I did. I don't need anything to cover my face." He then finished by saying he should have ended things himself because he did not want to spend the rest of his life in jail. After being arrested, Judge Jeffrey A. Manning Jr. declared that Ronald was incompetent to stand trial on April 25, 2000. Ronald was directed to be admitted to Mayview Hospital for treatment and evaluation and to be medicated until he became competent. A couple of months later, on June 28, 2000, the Commonwealth petitioned the court to permit psychiatrist Dr. Michael Wellner to have access to Ronald's medical records. He learned of Ronald's previous medical treatments, but on July 6, 2000, after interviewing Ronald, he told the trial court that Ronald was now competent to stand trial. With that declaration, the courts requested for Ronald to be taken out of Mayview Hospital and for the Department of Corrections to produce Ronald for trial on July 28, 2000. A new judge was assigned to Ronald's case, and Ronald was also appointed an attorney. The following year, Dr. Wellner was supposed to conduct another interview with Ronald, but Ronald refused to cooperate with Dr. Wellner and take part in any interviews or questioning. On May 21, 2001, the Commonwealth filed a motion with the trial court ordering Ronald to cooperate with the interviewing process. If he failed to cooperate in a meaningful manner, it would result in excluding evidence of any mental infirmity defense or mitigation at any stage of the proceeding. The very next day, Dr. Wellner was able to interview Ronald for a few hours, but eventually Ronald grew tired and refused to continue the interview. Dr. Wellner testified that he needed 15 hours of interview time to make any conclusions. Over the next few days, there were more attempts from the court and Dr. Wellner to get Ronald to continue on with the interview process. By May 25th, Dr. Wellner was only able to get 6 to 8 hours of interview time with Ronald, but the Commonwealth's request to bar Ronald from raising the defense of insanity was barred. Dr. Wellner, however, concluded that Ronald was competent to stand trial again. Ronald's trial officially commenced on November 1st, 2001, and he was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. With admitting that he intentionally killed the people he did on that fatal day, the jury did not have a hard time concluding that Ronald, beyond a reasonable doubt, intentionally, deliberately, and with premeditation, killed Mr. Kroll, Mr. Healy, and Mr. Sanilovici. Each victim was unlawfully killed, and the location in which they were shot showed intent. His goal was to kill white people for their racism, but his crimes were hate crimes themselves. On November 11th, 2001, there was a penalty phase hearing, and the jury unanimously concluded that the aggravating factors outweighed the mitigating factors and accordingly came back with 3 death sentences. The defense did try to concede that Ronald had committed the killings, but attempted to offer into evidence testimony from both Ronald and a psychiatric expert that would show he had brain injuries and a frontal lobotomy. The trial court, however, refused to permit the testimonies. On January 11, 2002, the trial court imposed the death sentences, along with a consecutive sentence of 115 to 230 years in prison for the remaining convictions. Ronald's first automatic appeal was on February 8, 2002. In the appeal, Ronald claimed that although he knew the difference between right and wrong and was competent to stand trial, he had a diminished capacity to understand and process information, to communicate, to abstain from mistakes, to learn from experience, to engage in logical reasoning, to control impulses, and to understand others' reactions. He also claimed that if a jury had been instructed as to diminished capacity, they would have considered that he was a psychotic man who manifested his paranoid schizophrenia through a lifetime of bizarre rituals and practices that culminated on March 1st, 2000. In conclusion, his psychiatric evidence would have served to negate the element of specific intent and resulted in a verdict of third-degree murder instead. The Commonwealth concluded, however, that neither instruction was required and that the defense of diminished capacity was unavailable to Ronald in light of the evidence presented by the Commonwealth and confirmed by Ronald's own psychiatric expert that he was capable of forming specific intent to kill. All of Ronald's appeals have been denied, and he is currently being held at SCI Green Correctional Facility.
He told me he regrets his life of violence, drugs, and alcohol.
You think you might be able to stop in the future, you think you can be able to measure it and just do a little bit here and a little bit there, but you're looking at a bona fide alcoholic and drug fanatic, and I can tell you that it's not. It's going to get worse, and it's going to lead to violence and chaos. You could jeopardize losing your whole family. You could jeopardize your life. You could end up like me.
Robert vanhook was born on January 14, 1960 in Sharonville, Ohio. His parents were in a relationship together, but their relationship was unhealthy. They were both heavily into drinking and would frequent bars. Robert was always allowed to drink and do drugs with his father because he had no issues giving it to him. He allowed Robert to experiment and would even take him on trips to bars. For Robert, the drinking and drug use did not stop, even though he tried to make an honest living by joining the military. He was able to enlist, but was eventually kicked out of the military because of his drug use. Another thing Robert struggled with besides drinking and using drugs was his sexuality. Robert admitted that he started robbing gay men at the age of 15. After getting out of the military, he went right back to robbing gay men. The victims would always think that they would be able to get some form of sex with Robert before they were victimized. On February 18, 1985, Robert chose to head out that evening to downtown Cincinnati, where the nightlife in the gay scene was buzzing. He made it to the subway bar, and he set his eyes on a man by the name of David Self. When Robert approached David at the bar, David seemed interested in Robert, and the two began to drink and talk for a total of 3 hours. The two were friendly with the bartender, so when it was time for the pair to go to David's house for a sexual encounter, David let the bartender know he was leaving and where they were going. After making it to David's apartment, Robert and David started to get intimate. David was put into a position that was compromising, and that is when something switched in Robert and he decided to attack David. The attack did not stop there, and he looked for a weapon in David's house in order to kill him. Some of David's wounds exposed internal cavities, and when Robert was done with his attack, he shoved a small bottle, a cigarette butt, and a weapon into the cavity. After going overboard with David's body, he then ransacked David's apartment looking for anything of value. He was able to find a chest full of jewelry which contained the gold chain David had worn to the bar that night. Building up an appetite, he then searched David's fridge to see if there was something he could eat, but there was nothing to his liking, so he left. Instead of going home, Robert drove to his friend Dr. Robert Hoy's house. Robert Hoy was a family friend and asked Robert what had happened. He expressed to his friend that he got into a fight with his stepfather and asked if he could borrow some money and eat some food. Robert Hoy made him a large meal and gave him money. When Robert was done eating, he drove all the way to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Robert was able to fly under the radar up until April 1st, 1985, when Oakland Park Police in Florida apprehended him. He was later indicted on April 18th, exactly 1 month after killing David, on 1 count of aggravated murder by a Hamilton County grand jury. His indictment carried a death penalty specification because of the aggravated robbery. On April 23rd, Robert pled not guilty by reason of insanity, so there was an automatic court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. He claimed to have gone into a homosexual panic and could not control his behavior. He had been fighting his true feelings and would take it out on any gay man who found him attractive or wanted to do anything sexual with him. He was found competent to stand trial and waived his rights to a jury trial, so his trial was held in front of a 3-judge panel. Robert's trial began on July 15, 1985, and he was found guilty by the judges on July 29, 1985. His death sentence came on August 8th. There were immediate appeals, and Robert's first appeal had 8 points of error, with one of them being that the incriminating statements he made to Cincinnati law enforcement should not have been allowed during trial because they were involuntary and should have been suppressed. In a quote from his appeal, he claimed that police ignored his attempt to invoke his constitutional rights and used psychological ploys, including employing his mother to assist them, to induce him to incriminate himself. The response to this argument was that Robert raised no procedural default arguments against that claim. In 2017, there were a few attorneys in the state of Ohio who tried to stop an execution because the inmate they were representing had a reaction to the lethal drugs, but every time they tried to get a hold of someone at the prison, they were unsuccessful. Because of this, Judge Michael Mers permitted a new system to be created that allowed open phone lines from the execution room to the courtroom. On July 18, 2018, which was Robert's execution day, he arrived at Lucasville Prison and had a final meal of French fries, cheeseburgers, strawberry cheesecake with whipped cream on top, a vanilla milkshake, and some grapefruit juice. After being taken to his execution room, a federal judge allowed an open phone line for the courtroom. Robert vanhook was officially pronounced dead at 10:44 on a Wednesday on July 18, 2018. Thank you all for watching another episode of Death Row Executions. Let me know what you guys think about this story in the comments below.
Every day in my life. I pray for him every day, and I pray for a lot of things.
Do you ever think about what's going to be going through your mind when it's you who's being led away?
I'm going to be thinking about my brothers here on death row, how they're going to be feeling, losing me. So that's probably what I'll be thinking, because I have no fear of death. In a way, I kind of look forward to it, because for me, it'd be like starting a new life again.
He may not fear death, but he has fought it for decades.